almost 30% of the total population of the state was severely impacted. In addition to that, the earthquake brought a lot of challenges by destruction and damages to health infrastructure, education setup, MSME, then damage to telecommunication, power, water supply, transportation sector. There was not a single sector which was, you can say, was intact. So that was a major blow. And after the blow, what we learned is Gujarat government and government of India really played a very big, massive earthquake reconstruction program. And from the very beginning, they revolutionized this disaster management at national level. That is one of the landmark disaster event which has changed the entire thing. Professor Sharma was remembering about the high-powered committee. We were having a high-powered committee on institutional changes at national level were going on at that time. And this earthquake expedited the various decision making and facilitated some good decisions at that time. If you see that in the aftermath, after 1 week of this earthquake, one and a half week, the Gujarat State Disaster Management Authority was established. And since then, it's really a new chapter of disaster management at national level has evolved. And under the, you can say, GSDMA guidance and guidance of current Prime Minister and the central government at that time, we really have a lot of laurels to share with the international community. And focus was on building back better after that earthquake. And we learned a lot of things under that post-earthquake reconstruction program, especially those 4 towns were rebuilt, and a lot of learning has come into that. One of the major attraction of that program under Building Back Better was that a lot of capacity building initiatives were taken. So it's an endless story to tell under those Building Back Better initiatives, which we had initiated after that. Community-based disaster risk reduction is one of them. And as I was discussing with someone that redevelopment of for those 4 towns, including Bhuj town, is the current need as well. Almost all cities have old city parts, and in a big earthquake like in Delhi or say Srinagar or Himachal Pradesh or many parts in northeastern states, we may expect not that type of damage. दिल तो यही कहता है कि ऐसा नहीं होना चाहिए, but दिमाग कहता है कि हो सकता है कि ऐसा भी हो. But you have to be prepared for that type of eventuality. So we have to learn a lot of things and try to implicate so many things which we had learned over the last 20 years to change our perspective for disaster risk reduction at national level. With these brief words, I invite Professor V.K. Sharma Sahab to say a few words. And before I request Professor V.K. Sharma Sahab, many of you are aware about Professor Sharma. Professor Sharma is currently Senior Professor at Indian Institute of Public Administration and Vice Chairman of Sikkim State Disaster Management Authority. Besides that, the major introduction of Professor Sharma is he is the founding coordinator of National Center for Disaster Management, which was established in 1995, which was ultimately upgraded to National Institute of Disaster Management. So he is the founder of one of the founders of National Institute of Disaster Management, and under his leadership and guidance, we have grown like anything. So, and Professor Sharma was not Professor Sharma. Almost every one of us, all the panelists here, have been in one or the other capacity, been involved in earthquake risk mitigation or earthquake risk management after Bhuj earthquake or at the time of the Bhuj earthquake itself. All of us were working at that time. Myself, Professor Ghosh, Professor Santosh Kumar, Professor Sharma, Vivek sir, ED sir, Utpal Sharma Sahab, Ravi Sinha Sahab, every one of us have contributed into that. So with this, I request Professor Sharma ji to take over and say a few words as the opening remarks. Professor V.K. Sharma sir.
Thank you very much, Dr. Amir Ali Khan. Honorable ED of and this very prestigious institute, National Institute of Disaster Management, General Bindal sir, my esteemed colleagues from NIDM, Professor Chandan Ghosh, Professor Santosh Kumar, Amir Ali, and entire team of NIDM, my very respected colleagues, Professor Sinha sir, Professor Utpal Sharma ji, who was earlier Director SAPT and a very knowledgeable person, Srivastav sir, and I really compliment NIDM, for organizing this kind of workshop, and particularly for Odisha and Gujarat, because these two events, they change the destiny of disaster risk reduction or disaster management in this country. And Gujarat, as Dr. Amir very rightly said, that we all who are working in disaster risk reduction today, we have seen, we are part of this, and we learned a lot, from the whole exercise. In fact, the speakers, which NIDM has selected today, they are, they will give you first-hand experience, and they will tell you, that how they took this, disaster. But I will say that it was a learning laboratory for the whole country. It was learning laboratory for whole South Asia, I should say. Professor Ravi Sinha, he took a team from Japan and studied different aspects of seismology, and so I think it's not only for people who are working on preparedness, mitigation, response. I think each and everything, you may be a beginner. I think the biggest training, if one can take, to visit this kind of disaster and to interact with different stakeholders. In fact, my learning, if I know little bit of disaster or ABCD of disaster management, this was because of our visits. After 6 days of this disaster, I was there with our colleagues. First day on 26 January, Mr. Anil Sinha, who was Joint Secretary, he went, with the team of in the Air Force plane and with doctors and some nurses. And I think the way he explained, it's a learning itself. So I think the speakers today will tell you that what was the scene and how much we have learned from this, where we have reached, where this country has reached in 20 years. This is amazing. Friends, the similar thing, I think myself and Professor Ravi Sinha, we too have witnessed that in Kobe earthquake 1995, which was world biggest disaster of last century, we have seen that thing Japan converted it into opportunity. They converted it into a lesson learning exercise. And after this earthquake, we both were together in Japan in 2001, and we could see that how many aspects of disaster management they studied, documented, and it was a real learning from Kobe. I will say that, there are many takes, which myself, which I will say that I learned from it. And one is that we could see the coordination, between different agencies, because different role players, government, non-governmental organization, academic institutions, how many people were there, and UN agencies, religious organizations, and this coordination, so that's why I'm saying that when we talk about disaster governance, I think a very important aspect we can learn from Gujarat, and how these officers managed, senior officers from Ahmedabad, how they made team. And Amir rightly said that these 4 towns, the senior officers were there, to see each and everything from relief to reconstruction and to rehabilitation. I have seen one more thing, that the reconstruction. In fact, it was three, four things I will tell, because the speakers are very important. One is that the reconstruction was completely unique. They learned from Maharashtra, they learned from other disasters, and it was participatory. Participatory in the sense that in Maharashtra, we have seen that contractors were doing, and most of the NGOs, they give their job to the contractors. But in Gujarat, it was participatory, it was in situ, earthquake resistant features, and the most important thing was that it was owner driven. And this concept came from Gujarat. And in Sikkim, where I am working today, in fact, I take full use of this study. And whatever done in Gujarat, I try to replicate it in Sikkim. So I'm always saying that in this kind of disaster, you can learn a lot. And these experiences, now there is no research required. I think from these lessons, we should apply in case there is such disaster happens. I think one last thing I will say, because, uh, you know, last thing is that the another lesson which we learned, in fact, the whole country learned, that how important is the critical infrastructure in the country. Mr. Vivek Srivastav will tell you that jail, of Bhuj, that was collapsed. So the prisoners and some of the noted prisoners, they came out. So the collector's office, that was affected in Bhuj. I think hospitals, schools, these are the critical structure. And Amir rightly said that people, students, they died under the rubble. Hospital, the district hospital collapsed. So I think this school safety program, the hospital safety program, critical infra, I think this thinking came from Gujarat, that how important these structures are and how we can save them. How the monuments, I think, and Utpalji will give you the account that the important monuments of Gujarat, they were affected. And then these people, and particularly SEPT, they studied different aspects. And one aspect was this, that how to save these monuments. And when we talk about retrofitting, how we can do it, in this kind of buildings, which are which has enormous value to the country, not only for the state. So I, once again, General Bindal, I compliment you that you are doing, this kind of exercise. And my friends, they are involved in fact, you can do, much more in this, because Gujarat, there are lots of learning. You can take different aspect. I mean, today, definitely we will more focused on urban issues and urban risk. But I think there are other issues which are equally important. And in case you divide it into Sindhi framework, you can have four learnings. Maybe learning in disaster risk governance, in build back better, not only in rural, but in not only in urban, but in rural areas, monument aspects and others. So I think each and every aspect we can discuss, and you will see that this will be a big exercise. It will be a big thing for these young people, who are learning disaster risk reduction and who are interested in this science. Even now, I am seeing that officers in different states, they are taking keen interest. Today, you come to Sikkim and you will see that how the different ministries, the secretary level people, they want to learn more and more in disaster management. Some of them, they are coming to NIDM and they are attending your programs. So I'm very happy that you are doing this exercise, and this is a national service, I should say, because you are disseminating this knowledge which is there with these people who will be talking to you and who will be talking to us, this morning. I thank you, Amir, for inviting me to this webinar, and over to you.
Thank you so much, sir. It's our pleasure to have you and have your thought-provoking ideas. We are definitely going to organize a series of webinars in coming days. So I will be in touch with you, and we will finalize something under your guidance. Definitely, sir. And Vivek, sir, this is your turn. Before I request my executive director for keynote address. So you are the main speaker today, and reason is that you have to give us the account from first-hand experiences you faced. And for the participants, Vivek Srivastava sir is a senior IPS officer working with the government of India right now. And the most important aspect of Vivek sir is that he was the SP at the Bhuj town itself, I think. And he was the SP of Kutch district and located at Bhuj. Sir may correct me. And besides that, he served various positions at state government level as well as at central government level, including the directorship of Special Protection Group. With this brief introduction, I request Vivek sir to share your experiences, first-hand experiences. सर कैसे हुआ, क्या हुआ, आपने क्या किया, आप कहाँ थे, वो सारी चीजें हमें बताइए. एंड लेट्स सी सर, दिस इज योर टर्न. सर आपको अनम्यूट करना पड़ेगा.
Can you hear me?
हाँ, प्लीज सर.
Good morning, everybody. I'll just start by saying I was the superintendent of police of Kutch district, as has been pointed out, and I was located at Bhuj. And Bhuj was actually close to the epicenter of this earthquake, and it actually felt almost the full impact of the earthquake. Now, let me start by saying that actually, when the earthquake struck, I was at the parade ground, and the parade was actually going to start in the next 15 minutes. And all of a sudden, there was a rumbling sound, which it appeared that almost 1,000 horses were actually riding towards you. And the earth started shaking. And gradually, I could feel that it was actually very difficult even to actually stand in the parade ground. Luckily, that was actually the safest place also at that point of time. I could see almost the buildings all around me. Even the boundary wall started cracking, and then almost in a slow motion, everything collapsed. And as the things started collapsing, there was a huge plume of actually dust, and everything became black, and it became engulfed. So actually, I can say it was almost as if it was the first experience of pralay. So at that point of time, it was a long time back, but about 2 decades earlier. So this, as Professor V.K. Sharma had pointed out, that actually the Kutch earthquake had become a starting point for all the effort for mitigation of disaster mitigation. Before that, there wasn't too much of appreciation of any preparedness towards any disaster. And such was the case with me and all other officers in Kutch at that point of time. So to be very frank, let me tell you, I was actually blank about what to do. The only thing which I was very clear about was that it is a big earthquake which has struck this place. All buildings almost seem to have inside had got demolished. So this was a big thing. And to tell you very frankly, I was not able to think what was to be done at that point of time. So the best thing which I did was to collect the people who were there. We had 15 minutes to go for the parade, collected them, unfurled the flag, sang the national anthem. So this was more to gain some time and to think on my feet. And also to give a general feeling that one was actually in control of the situation, which actually internally I was not, and nobody was actually. So once the national anthem was sung, then I got into the car and actually wanted to go back. So this tremor was for almost 100 seconds. And it was almost, these were the longest 100 seconds I have actually encountered in my life. It was almost unending. So when I started going back, I found that almost the entire city had collapsed, and it was a huge rubble actually. So you couldn't go into any of the streets because it was all filled by rubble, and of course some pieces were burning. You could find people actually, somebody's hands is sticking out from the debris, somebody crying, etc. So it was complete mayhem. Yeah. So I took the outer circuitous route to my office, which was not too far away. And there I found that my office had also collapsed. So I could not actually go into my chamber. Just adjoining the office was the SP's residence. I had joined just 1 month before. So I was not staying in that residence. The earlier incumbent had not actually vacated that. I was staying in the circuit house, but that had also got demolished. I was also told that the circuit house had also got demolished. So, and the DM's office and the DM's residence, etc. So, in the interim time, it gave me, by this time, actually 20-25 minutes had elapsed after the earthquake. So actually, one of the first thing which I did going back was the realization that there is zero communication. No landlines are working, no mobiles are working, no HF is working. All HF towers have collapsed. So the first thing which I did was to ask my wireless staff to actually go and get the HF functional, so that at least you had a simplex one-way communication from Bhuj to Ahmedabad, which they got operational in the next 25 to 30 minutes. So the first thing which I did was to write a telegram to my headquarters with a copy to the PS to CM and all the important dignitaries in Ahmedabad. It was actually a detailed message. And looking back, I think it may look like actually self-praise, but it was a pretty good effort, because I had almost asked in the one telegram itself, I had asked for 20,000 extra manpower, including chlorine tablets, because water supply was also had to stop because there was no power, so nothing would actually work. So instead of continuing further, what I did in a sequential fashion, let me break and actually go on the broader aspects. So how to deal with that? And what are the actually learning points and the broader issues which I would like to bring to the notice of this to the notice. One is basically post-disaster. There are two broad categories of work one has to do. One would be relief and rehabilitation, which will normally is the purview of the civil administration, and another is search and rescue, which is actually the more current aspect and which actually impacts everybody. So the second thing which I want to say is that even though disaster preparedness, disaster training, activities concerning disaster mitigation and general public awareness and awareness in the administration has increased much more than what it was at that point of time. But still, what I would want to point out is no two disasters are alike or are in any way likely to be alike. However much you may prepare an individual or train a person to handle a disaster, it will be a new experience. So there is no getting away from the fact that you have to think and act on your feet. And if a person is unable to think and act on one's feet, then whatever preparation one can give to that individual, it may not actually be enough. Another thing which a disaster actually brings out is normally one would have thought in an earthquake, the major thing would be what? First thing would be to actually people get trapped, many people get killed. So that is the end of the issue. So the only thing you have to do is to cremate those. Just as a way, let me say that in Kutch town itself, more than 4,500 people died in the first 100 seconds. The total number of injuries in the entire district was more than 150,000. The total number of deaths, as per our official count, was close to 15,000. As has already been pointed out, the civil hospital in the district headquarters, Bhuj, had collapsed, and almost 250 people, including doctors, had died there. So there was no medical facilities to start with there. Good thing was that Bhuj town had the brigade headquarters. It has an independent brigade, and so the brigadier is located in Bhuj town itself. And of course, there are two Air Force, frontline Air Force bases there, Nalia and Bhuj, but they were also very badly affected. But the only good point was that the landing strips were functional, so the aircraft would land there. But they also suffered major damage and a large number of casualties also. And so, of course, the police also. So the first thing for me to do was to actually regroup, because our officers and families were equally affected, as it is likely to be. So the first thing which I did was to actually establish so that I could feed the families and the force itself, because if I have to take work from my men, so then actually I have to take care of at least the logistics for the families, because otherwise, if every police officer is going to take care of his or her family alone, then who will be there to actually take care of the wider population? So one can say the number of I issued in that sense illegal orders, because the FCI go down was there. So I asked my officers to go and get rice, dal, and other things from there. Maybe borrow it, but if one may put it in that fashion. And so that a regular langar was established for police officers and their family members in the headquarters. Now, in any disaster, for any person who is going to do anything worthwhile, whether in relief or rehabilitation, you have to lead from the front. It is no use you issuing instructions from the sinecure of your office, and which you yourself are unlikely to follow. So that is one of the, because here, actually traditional power will not work. You have to actually lead. And to lead, you have to show that you are also willing to suffer as your men have to suffer in a disaster, because things will not be good. So I also decided that I will also have food from the langar itself. And of course, no special, no person will make food for me either. So every available resource, every available manpower was deployed for relief, for rescue work. Now, initially, the point is, one can always turn around and say, the manpower position, the logistics, etc., are so poor because it is actually not geared to meet any major disaster. So it will, of course, be inadequate. Not only inadequate, it will be wholly inadequate. So instead of despairing, it is a good idea to actually figure out, and what we try to do, what are the resources available and how best to actually deploy those resources, which may not amount to much, but that is what we have at that point of time, unless actually reinforcement and additional manpower and logistics actually reach. So what we did was actually we started getting, actually by the first couple of hours we could get information. Actually, Kutch is a very huge district. So the western actually portion was not too badly damaged, and the casualties were much less. The eastern portion and the central area closer to the the casualties were much more, for example, in Bhajau and Bhuj and other areas where almost cities, etc., was completely destroyed. Since the HF was established by that type of time, so a reorganization of manpower was done. All the other police stations, to at least only skeletal manpower to be left, and additional manpower to be sent to Bhuj and other places which was affected by disaster. Especially the first 24 hours become very, very critical, because that is the time when the information actually seeps into the higher formations. Then decisions are taken at the higher level of sending forces, mobilization, and sending vehicles, etc. And then they have to reach the disaster site itself. So this may take, and since Bhuj is almost 400 kilometers away from Ahmedabad, and of course all relevant decisions would be taken from Ahmedabad, being the state capital. So it would take a long time also. So it would be anticipated that for any regular help to arrive, it would be only the aircrafts would come immediately, but to have substantial manpower, we'll have to actually be on our own at least for the next 20-24 hours. So this redeployment of manpower was done. And in the very initial way, these manpower, they were sent to different micro disaster sites to organize self-help there, because we did not have sufficient manpower to actually help those people. So it was actually, you can say, the people were rescuing the people using normal implements which one may have, and with bare hands. So this was done for the first 6 hours to 8 hours to 10 hours at places up till 12 hours. You must also look at what are the resources one can command. So, for example, in Gandhidham, it is next to Kandla port, we have heavy earth moving machinery, which was fortunately not much affected by the earthquake. So our local officer was asked to send all the JCB machines as fast as possible and practicable from there, and it was 72 kilometers away from Bhuj. So then those could arrive. Now, time is actually of essence, and I can actually go on and almost for a couple of hours, because it almost seems like yesterday that these things happened. But now only I will just flag important issues. In any disaster, while we may think these will be the consequences of this disaster, what is likely to happen is that there will be many additional things which one may have to cater to. I just, if I'm taking too much of time, kindly point it out. So I'll.
नो प्लीज देख लीजिए सर, अपना थोड़ा सा क्लोज करिए और अपनी जो आपकी जो लर्निंग्स थी ना, थोड़ा सा उनको भी बता दीजिएगा सर.
हाँ, बस
जो मेजर लर्निंग्स.
in the next 3-4 minutes. So,
yeah, it's okay, sir.
One is that, as I said, crime is one thing which will immediately impact, because people are willing to take care of any situation. There are some people who will take care of any to further their own private ends. So any disaster, crime will become very important after 10 to 12 years. There is another point of disaster tourism. Many people would want to come there and clog your systems just to see what is happening. So that has to be prevented. Beggars became a menace by the third year because everything was free. So there was a huge traffic of beggars actually coming. So you had to prevent beggars for communication there. Communication, seamless communication between various agencies, the army, the paramilitary, the police, the home guard, the state police of different coming and at one point of time, almost 20,000 men were there working at the same time. So all must be on the same page, and there must be seamless communication. There's something has to be worked out for there. Every person is under stress, so everybody's fuse is short. So that almost should be actually taken into consideration by communicating or telling anybody to do it. And you have to be like actually Vishnu, but take everybody's wish, something like that. There has to be a sense of public welfare, because that is there. And not only public welfare, you have to care for your own men, because they are actually as stressed as you said. And as I said, you have to lead by example. So, and then, of course, I was there for the next almost 1.5 years. So I could actually, I can say it was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the worst of times because I was in the midst of a disaster. It was the best of times as far as a personal learning experience and as a journey was concerned. So that is how it was. So we worked with the NGO. We liaised with them. I saw reconstruction work also happening, how relief and rehabilitation happens, how the various laws, rules, state disaster authorities took shape, etc. That was there. Deployment of forces, how you have to actually do it. And last but not the least, how you can actually manage the press. Because your senior formations over-rely on the reportage which is given the press. So unless you manage it, I don't say you're feeding by wrong information, but there has to be some amount of liaison and communication with the press. Otherwise, it unnecessarily actually creates more trouble for you. So I've already, I think, exceeded the time allocated to me by 3 to 4 minutes. So I'll hand here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir, for sharing your experiences, and you very nicely summarized all those things, including the media management. That is the backbone for managing the disaster very effectively, because वो जो मीडिया का जो सारा रोल है ना, उस पे we have worked from NIDM side a lot, and we will definitely, sir, coming again to you with a request to share more experiences on those thematic webinars which we are planning. So thank you so much, sir. And if some questions are coming, we will take it up after some time. So now, may I request our Executive Director, Mr. Major General Manoj Kumar Bindal Saab. Bindal Saab, again, very specialized experiences for this webinar, sir. He was also in the Bhuj town at that time, as many of you are already aware. So, with no detailed introduction to our executive directors, all of us are aware about his credentials. Sir, thank you so much for gracing the occasion, and now you can share your experiences with a keynote address to this webinar, sir. Thank you, sir. It's your turn.
Thank you, Dr. Amir Ali Khan. And first of all, heartiest welcome to all the participants who are patiently listening. Everyone. And special welcome to our esteemed panelists who are here. That we are commemorating 20th year for the Bhuj earthquake 2001, which was a landmark event as it set off making of disaster management programs, disaster management plans all over the country, with Gujarat leading the whole effort at that point of time. This particular earthquake, if I talk about, in this, no one was prepared. It came unannounced. Was not predicted. However, yes, there were some religious beliefs. I'll just give you an example how people started connecting after the earthquake. There was a temple in Anjar where there's a double deity very close to each other on two blocks of marble. They were coming together. So it was said that in somewhere in 1953, when they came together, there was an earthquake, and it was believed that once they will come together by a certain amount, there's going to be another pralay in that area. And it was actually coming together. So even the religious beliefs that was there, whether you call it superstitious or not, that was not being taken into heed. And science, as it is, does not have any way of predicting a earthquake, except at that point of time, even zonation of zone 5, zone 4 was not much publicized. So science was also not taken heed, and no one was prepared. The worst part was no one was prepared for such massive calamity, as if everyone was sanguine that it cannot happen to us. And that is where the number of deaths increased very much. With the complete engineered structures, non-engineered structure, complete Bachau town got uh, demolished. It was not demolished because the maximum impact of the earthquake went to Bachau town. It got mostly due to the reason that nearly 100% houses or 99% houses in Bachau town was just stones placed over each other, held together by mud, and hence the moment the ground started trembling, shaking, they got demolished. Similar thing happened in Anjar. Similar thing happened in most of the places in Kutch district, complete, because of non-engineered and masonry structure which they had. Here only I'll try to add that there was a special type of construction in Kutch district, which was round-shaped bashas that they had, which the villagers used to make for themselves. Traditionally, that is the traditional household structure for that area. They did not get affected. Some of them developed some crack, but most of them were safe, which gave an idea that traditional structures must be studied in detail, because there has to be some meaning to coming to that uh, particular design, and this needs to be absorbed and implemented in our designs possible. The effect that after the earthquake, when we started rebuilding our facilities in our own units, we made a few houses as per the design of that hut, so that in future it might withstand the effect of the earthquakes. Here, the role of the community is very important. The resilience of the community is very important. The sequence of activities that happened when the earthquakes struck, the tremors were for 53 seconds. There have been, I'll now add out here, that prior to this also there were large number of tremors which were felt in that area, which later came to light, but it was not, I said, science was not paid heed to. And after this also there were large number of tremors which kept on coming for days together, and but kept on diminishing in their intensity. So in the first 43 seconds of that earthquake, the sequence of action that happened was the first responders were the local population, which was totally lost because they didn't know what to do, they didn't know what not to do. They didn't know whether to run out of the building or to stay in the building. They were so shell shocked because no capacity awareness programs had been done in that area for dealing with major disasters like earthquakes. So there were no do's and don'ts or mock drills or any other things to fall back upon. Uh, but ultimately, it is the neighbors and the local community who are the first responders, and they are the ones who help each other. Uh, then, immediately after that, came the community-based organizations helping with the help of local community. And at that point of time, NDRF never used to be there at that point of time. Army came out because Air Force itself was very much affected. The first two teams which came out, I was part of one of team leader of the one of the teams, and that also happened by chance because on that particular day, me and my whole column had gone for an exercise 2 days prior to a hillock next to the hill station, air pad of the Air Force on the hillocks adjoining the Bhuj town, towards the north of Bhuj town. And on that day, 26th morning, we were uh, already practicing our army tactics on that hillock when the earthquake struck. So the moment it struck, we immediately grouped there, and within 15 minutes, we started back towards our cantonment uh, because we understood that now it will require a lot of effort and we have to stop our exercise. In fact, we saw the complete Bhuj town falling from that hillock, each and every building, the Bhujia fort falling down, the walls falling down, and you could make out in which areas the uh, effect was more by the plume of dust that was coming up. Uh, there was a rumbling sound. There was a huge blast sort of sound. The first instance, a thought which came into the mind was that we had been attacked by a neighboring country, and it was a huge bomb which has been set off. But later we realized this, no, it is a earthquake. And the ground started shaking, ground started cracking. So we started jogging on that ground because that is the best way to avoid falling down and get caught in any crack in the ground. So best thing is you start jogging, or I don't know how you'll understand that trotting on that ground from one place to another, back and fro, so that you don't get caught into the motion of the earth. So that's how we saved ourselves, and then we immediately moved back. And we found that the people were in shock. People were in that much shock that people were just sitting next to the roadside with blank faces, not doing anything. But there was a certain group of people who was into action, and that was mostly the elderly who were moving around. The young population went into a total shock. That is what I saw in that while moving back to the bush, the cantonment to gather our stuff to move out again. The elderly population was active and they were trying to organize people, whereas the young population was not so active and they were being prodded into action, which shows that maybe the way we are bringing up our next generation needs to have a lot of capacity development initiatives, capacity awareness initiatives related to disaster management because of various educational needs today to score a certain percentage of marks. The young population is being protected to an extent that when the such time comes, they fall short. They might fall short to take the right decision on their own. Uh, then thereafter, the key stakeholders they came out. since Bhuj town was affected badly, the complete administration had collapsed for some time, and basically because their own buildings had collapsed. So the first priority somehow keep their families safe and move them out to some area where they were being looked after, which was brought out by Shri Vivek Srivastav ji, that yes, they started a program of community langar and place the families safe, because then only they can move out and start working without uh, tension that their own families or their other men who are there, they are also being looked after with that assurance. That is a natural reaction. So it took some time for everyone to actually move out. Uh, the whole hospital had fallen down, but fortunately, the army hospital was totally intact with a few cracks, but even the OT was intact. However, within a few hours, because we have army has a drill of creating structures and wilderness when we go for any operations. OT was prepared outside. There, to my horror, that was somewhere in the evening, I saw a group of men carrying a body and another two persons carrying a head separately coming to the hospital for them join together. That was the level of shock. You can imagine that people had lost the capacity to think rationally. And that is the time, because of lack of communication, no one knew what is happening. It was only after the at that point of time army fanned out, the police fanned out uh, in that whole area, the local administration also started people, that the people started, uh, I'll say, calming down to some extent when they started understanding as to what is happening around them and what is being done to help them out. So, so making the public affected population aware of what is being done to alleviate their losses, to alleviate their pain, to alleviate their hardship is very, very important as part of the communication. Uh, and that was done, but slightly later at some point of time. And thereafter, we had a large number of people coming from all over the countryside. Even Israel Center Hospital, which came. Luckily, the airstrip was intact with minor cracks, but it could take on uh, transport aircrafts to land in. So the relief material started coming, and also the road connectivity was open, even though one of the bridges near Morbi was damaged. But still, there were alternate routes available through which the trucks started coming. So within about 48 hours, the thing started becoming better. The best part of the community there, I'll say, is that morning this earthquake happened. By evening, in most of the areas, community langars had started. All the local people, the local community leaders, the local rich people, the local people who had the facilities, they just opened their doors for anyone want and open the community langar. So the whole area never went hungry for more than 12 to 18 hours, I'll say. That was a very, very big community service which was done. And it is a thing which needs to be implemented everywhere. Now, I'll again come back to response. Local knowledge is very essential, and hence the community itself, with the local knowledge, the local relation around them, the motivation level is different. The empathy factor is very high. The bonhomie is there. Community service comes naturally that time, and they know the health status of each member in that particular area, so they take care accordingly. So in this whole process, the local community have to have a lot of say in the whole process of planning, preparation, mitigation. And of course, there is always issue of sections of society which have acceptability to a particular section only. So those also need to be kept in mind whenever we are planning response and relief or search and rescue with the others. And this local community has to be trained to have the capacity to absorb and regroup with the help of outside agencies as and when they start coming, which they will come, which they will come. So, mitigation preparedness is very, very important. It showed us that engineered and non-engineered structures, the ratio has to tilt in favor of engineered structures which are earthquake safe. Non-engineered audit has to be done, and they need to be demolished over a period of time, oblique retrofitted, and made earthquake proof. The Build Back Better Bhuj is a very live example where for building back better, complete roads, a lot of roads were broadened in that Build Back Better. Large number of structures were demolished, and totally a new Bhuj city was established. So lot of efforts took place, and there lot of technical advancement could be seen. How the buildings repaired, how the people repaired their buildings while they were standing for a multi-storied building without bringing them down. So those things need to be brought into practice, and these lessons learned must be made public. Traditional knowledge I had already spoken about. It is very important that capacity awareness programs must be carried out to increase the mitigation, because earthquake is something which comes unannounced. The highest time period which was given for earthquake was recently in Mexico, when 17 seconds advance warning was given, and that was considered as a big advancement in the scientific community. So each household should have their emergency kit. They should have pathways. They should know what not to create, and there should be mock drills being carried out. There should be uh, discussions with the community, and family members should be encouraged to discuss various scenarios and various contingencies that might arise and how to deal with them. And the young population, the school going children, also need to be mentally robust and mentally resilient through the awareness campaigns that they should be able to take on, because such major events cause a lot of psychological issues, psychological damage, psychological issues. I remember for months together, so many psychological interventions were carried out. People from doctors from all over the country had come, and they established clinics out there. Some negative things which happened there was crime, which was referred to by Mr. Vivek Srivastava also. We had people who came in from outside as responders, and they started looting. To the extent that I remember police and army together started having night guard over the camps to prevent the camps from looting. Because what happens is, when people run out to such camps, they carry very limited stuff along with them, which they could take out. But that limited stuff is very, very expensive because they tend to carry such items. So we had to actually put guard on the relief camps and various communities at night, which added a lot of strain to our limited resources, but it was required. So that arson and looting, which happens from the people who come from outside, is a major concern. And one more thing which was found lacking was there was no heavy equipment. We had buildings, we could see someone trapped there live, but we could not extricate because there was no equipment to remove the slab over it. And if you break the slab, the person is going to die due to the slab caving in or other things caving in. So you require something which could very neatly and cleanly lift up the slab, exposing the hole which is there in the ground to take out, rescue the person. So such things were missing, and it took a lot of time. Finally, we had to resort to only JCBs. The JCBs by themselves are very dangerous because they cannot lift a thing clean. They break. You have to break a particular part of concrete and then take it out. So that is a capacity which needs to be built up. And in this, I think the public sector undertakings, the local industries which are there, they should be involved in a big way, and their resources need to be taken into account so that they are brought into use whenever required. I have said enough because I can go on and on this, like Mr. Vivek Srivastav said, but I'll stop here because we have such eminent speakers who will be coming after me, and I'm keen to hear to them. I so much because Dr. Amir Ali Khan told me you have to speak more than the keynote. You have to speak about your experiences. So over to you, Dr. Amir Ali Khan.
Thank you so much, sir. And definitely, we deserve to share all these experiences by you as well. Because वो जो फर्स्ट हैंड एक्सपीरियंस है ना, हमें कहाँ मिलेगा सर? बहुत सारे लोग नहीं थे, कुछ ही लोग थे. So we try to gather people like you who had the first hand experience. जो आपने मुझे बहुत पहले बताया था कि आपकी गाड़ियां नीचे को स्लिप करने लगी थी जब आप उस पे हिलॉक पे कर रहे थे. So that is so excited. जो अर्थक्वेक में काम करते हैं कि कैसे अर्थक्वेक को महसूस किया जा सकता है. योर experiences of that traditional भोंगा जो वहाँ का ट्रेडिशनल कंस्ट्रक्शन प्रैक्टिस है. सो दैट इज अनदर वेरी वेरी well taken message from your thing. Then हॉस्पिटल वाला सर जो आपने बताया, मुझे नहीं मालूम था कि आर्मी हॉस्पिटल वाज देयर एंड दैट वाज इंटैक्ट. सो बहुत सारी चीजें हैं सर जो आपने ऑलरेडी हाईलाइट किया है. थैंक यू सो मच फॉर गिविंग द मैसेज एज वेल एज शेयरिंग योर एक्सपीरियंसेस. वो डूज एंड डोंट तो सर मुझे अभी लगता है कि अभी भी शायद नहीं इम्प्लीमेंट हो रहा है नेशनल लेवल पे एज फार अर्थक्वेक्स आर कंसर्न. भुज आया और 20 साल हो गए, वो कल जैसी बात लगती है, बट स्टिल इफ लॉन्ग वे टू गो. मुझे ऐसा लगता है लॉट ऑफ वर्क हैज टू बी डन. With this, we thank you, sir. And now we move ahead to Professor Ravi Sinha. Sinha Saab doesn't require a big introduction. He's one of the prominent expert at national level in the area of earthquake risk mitigation engineering, currently working as professor of civil engineering at IIT Bombay. And he has been involved with this Bhuj earthquake since very beginning. As Professor Sharma was pointing out, he did an aerial survey in the very first few days of the earthquake. And sir, बहुत ज्यादा आपके बारे में नहीं बोल रहा हूँ और आपको just request कर रहे हैं कि अपने share experience कीजिएगा sir, because those are the things which we are trying to catch up today. Thank you, sir. It's your turn.
Yeah, thank you, Amir. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, yes.
I'll share a short presentation.
Please, sir.
And so I have decided to focus a bit more on the future on the basis of what we have learned from the past.
Yes,
And
sir.
specifically, so Bhuj earthquake and other such earthquakes have so many dimensions. And one of the critical ones is the issue of urban areas and how to make them safer. So I'm going to be focusing mainly on the urban issues over here in the short time I have. So let's look at the past with specific reference to the observations from the Bhuj earthquake. So as we know, as has already been mentioned, the earthquake occurred 20 years ago, and it occurred in the town of Bhuj, or in the district of Kutch, which near the town of Bhuj. And actually, it was very close to two small towns, Anjar and Bachau, and actually right under Bachau. And this is the area which was the most affected. Interestingly, Ahmedabad, which is about 250 kilometers away from the epicenter, was also badly affected in the earthquake. The earthquake magnitude, as the India Meteorological Department is concerned, has been assigned as 7.6. Even though initially, based on preliminary data, they had estimated the magnitude at 6.9. And the earthquake occurred at 8:46 a.m. on January 26, just before the flag hosting ceremony, which is normally at 9 o'clock. What is important is the difference between 7.6 and 6.9 is not just the number or the semantics or something. The consequences of a 6.9 earthquake and a 7.6 earthquake are fundamentally different. So when you are sitting in the government or when you're sitting in some policy making capacity, this difference will between the two would be all the difference in terms of what is the action which you recommend to be taken. So this was a very, very important difference, which also showed in the way the government of India reacted to the earthquake. As mentioned, the epicenter was located in Kutch district near Bachau town. More than 13,000 people were found dead due to earthquake, and 4 towns, Bhuj, Anjar, Bachau, and Rapur, were very badly affected, and also around 7,000 villages were very, very badly affected. It caused extensive damage in Ahmedabad, which is located almost 250 kilometers from the epicenter. And in Ahmedabad town itself, over 750 people had died because of collapsed buildings. I'll just show some pictures so that you get a grasp of what kind of disaster we are looking at. Many of these pictures we had taken from the aircraft. So you can, for example, you can see this is for part in Anjar. This is in Bachau. Bachau was the closest to the epicenter and also suffered the maximum damage. This is one of the villages near the epicenter. You can see almost the entire village has been obliterated. Even the buildings which you see standing are actually very, very badly damaged. One of the villages, again, not far from the epicenter, a very prosperous village, Manafra village. Many of the traditional jewelers come from this village. Then coming to Bhuj town, so again, I'll show just some buildings, so modern constructions, what kind of effect they had due to the earthquake. And here you can see that almost half the building has collapsed on the people. You can see the staircase in the front. Now, traditional construction, we found that one kind of traditional construction known as the bhonga, they survived the earthquake very well. And so this is one of the bhongas in one of the villages, actually to the west of Bhuj, the area where the earthquake damage was much less. This is the interior of the same bhonga. The family which was living there allowed us to take lots of pictures from the inside, so we understood what made it so earthquake resilient. And what it shows is that this area, Bhuj area, has been experiencing damaging earthquakes from time to time for a long time, and the local community has adopted construction practices so that they have learned how to keep themselves safe. But of course, these are the skills and knowledge which are being lost in time. So this is just a quick glance of what happened in 2001 as far as the damages are concerned. So if you look at the features of the earthquake or the key points, so first of all, this is the first urban earthquake since independence. And also this was the first televised disaster in India. Of course, the television coverage was mainly concentrated on Ahmedabad because there was also a fair degree of damage to Ahmedabad. But the fact remains that an earthquake disaster was brought to people's drawing room all over the country so that people could relate what is happening over there with their own surroundings and with their own homes. Some of the important urban-centric challenges which were observed at that time. First of all, the administration capacity was very, very badly degraded. In Kutch district as a whole and also in Bhuj town, a large number of government officers had victims in their own families, either as people or as buildings they were living. So it distracted them because they also had to take care of getting their own lives in order, in addition to the administration requirements which they had. District collector's house, for example, had collapsed. SP's house had not collapsed, so but it was not habitable, for example. Secondly, what it brought about is that the institutional capacity on a whole is low in the sense that it does not have scaling capacity. It cannot scale up and down depending on the need. And whenever there was a major disaster like this, it was found that in that case, the institutional capacity also became a constraint on the ability to respond to the disaster. Then we also found that the social resiliency, as expected, gets reduced drastically. People are in a sense of shock. Even people who are normally expected to take responsible action could not do so because of the shock. Then we also found, as expected, that there was a sense of despondency among survivors, very large number of them, and which also meant that they became a burden on the system instead of contributing to strengthen the system. And one of the interesting things, and a very important one, is that it brought out the importance of at-scale search and rescue and at-scale relief operations. We found in that area there's so many families, so many people absolutely bitter about the fact that for hours and hours after the disaster, they were able to hear the voices of their loved ones. They were able to actually communicate to the loved ones who were in trapped buildings which have collapsed. And ultimately, they could not survive because the search and rescue teams were very few in number, they were ill-equipped, and it was not possible for them to extricate these people safely. So a very large number of people who had survived the collapse of the building they were living in could not be rescued, and they have passed away because of that. And while their family members were just struggling to see how they could be brought out. So this is a very, very important point, because the lingering psychological trauma on these families, and a very large number of them, may still be continuing. Then also the good things, after the earthquake, what happened after the earthquake? The earthquake rehabilitation and recovery program, which was implemented by the government of Gujarat, has now been globally acknowledged as pathmaking. And some of the very important elements of that strategy, and at that time these were all very new. Today they may seem to be like business as usual, because they have got mainstreamed in the country. But the key element was that it would not be on the basis of perception. It would not be on the basis of so-called understanding of ground realities. It would be based on knowledge. And that was a fundamental shift for the first time we observed in the government, that they are not relying on the basis of, you can say, informal so-called understanding of what is required, but based on actual knowledge. And then also fundamentally, it was decided by the government that all the rehabilitation and recovery programs would be community driven. So they are not beneficiaries waiting to get something, they have to participate to make it happen. Then there was a very strong emphasis on equity. This also became a very important anchor on World Bank's program from around that time onwards. That societal fault lines would try to be resolved through the process of relief and rehabilitation. Then focus is not just to bring the people back on their feet, but the focus is on economic upliftment. How can you make that area as a whole better, and not just coming back to what it was before a disaster? And then also address multi-sectoral underlying risks. So it's not just the earthquake which is causing the problem. There are many, many underlying risk factors which are making the earthquake situation worse. So to address them. And lastly, it was comprehensive. So even though a small part of the state has got affected by the disaster, these things which you are doing in terms of strengthening the infrastructure, strengthening the institutional capacity, and so on, you cover the entire state, because tomorrow there may be a disaster in some other district of the state. And at that time, it should not be found wanting. And for the initiatives which was taken by the government of Gujarat, the Gujarat State Disaster Management Authority was conferred by the UN ISDR with a certificate of merit, which is the second highest award which they give after the Sasakawa Award. So it has been internationally recognized as not just something which is very useful for the state, but also which is a role model globally. So quickly, let us look at how we have moved in the last 20 years, not just in Gujarat, but nationally. So what is the status of our cities today? Bhuj was, after all, a small town. If you look at our major cities, and here I have just given the 10 largest cities from the census, population varying from 18 million, 1.8 crore to 3.1 1 million or 31 lakhs. And if you look at the population density on the right hand side, then they are all like in the range of 15,000 to 20,000 people per square kilometer. And if you compare it with the population density in some of the globally very well known and large cities, so New York, New Jersey, Connecticut urban agglomeration, population density is 1,800 persons per square kilometer. Tokyo, Yokohama urban agglomeration, which is the world's largest urban area, has a population density of 4,400 people per square kilometer. London, which is another very dense city, has a population of less than 6,000 people per square kilometer versus 15 to 20,000 per square kilometer in the large cities in India. So India does not just have a high population in our cities, also very densely packed. And it has the implication on vulnerability as well as on disaster management responsibilities. And also the growth rates, if you look at our Indian cities, again, if you look at the last column over here, at a decadal level, we are growing at a rate well in excess of 10%, as against at the global level, population growth of nearly 1% at a decadal level in those other very large cities. And what it means is that the experiences of those cities, while they may be useful to us, They cannot be replicated because we are looking at fundamentally different urban challenges in India compared to the urban challenges they have faced and they have tried to tackle. So other important characteristics, our growth is largely unplanned, large slum populations, poor implementation of bylaws, large proportion of non-engineered buildings which are fundamentally weaker. Then buildings expand incrementally. Something gets built for one floor. A few years later, a second floor is added. Then a third floor is added. Even the building materials, the construction materials are mixed. The building maintenance is very poor of old buildings. And also very frequently, the construction itself, the initial construction is poor quality because the material was not good. So our cities, when you're talking about urban disaster risk, our cities are densely populated. They are rapidly growing. They experience poor urban compliance of bylaws, have large proportion of non-engineered constructions, and even engineered construction are not well maintained and they degrade over time quite rapidly. And these are all characteristics which are very different from the global major urban cities in the developed economies. So, which makes them the experience from there not directly relevant to our cases. And on top of that, our cities are also the base for political and economic decision making, which means that if our cities are affected, it affects these decision makers, which is going to have a ramification much further than the cities which they are based in. And also, our cities, our urban areas, like in any other country, are the symbols of nation's development. So if things don't go well in the cities, it becomes international news that this is what happens to India. And if we put all of these together, improving disaster risk capacity of our cities is crucial to us for sustainable growth of the country and also for maintaining the image of the country as a responsible, upwardly mobile nation of the world. So, how do we do all these things now? So, where do we want to go in the future and how can we do that? Fortunately for us, India is not the only country which is facing these challenges. A large number of countries are facing these. And during the third United Nations World Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction, which is also known as the Sendai Conference, 4 priorities for action were adopted by the United Nations, by all the countries of the world, including India. And those priorities for action are, first of all, understanding disaster risk. Second is strengthening disaster risk governance to manage that risk. Thirdly, investing in risk reduction for resilience, not just in risk management. And fourthly, enhancing preparedness for effective response and to build back better in recovery, rehabilitation, and reconstruction. So these are the 4 priorities which all the countries of the world have agreed on. And in the context of urban disaster risk management, it's priority 1 which is most important because we have to understand the risk. If we don't understand the risk, what I mentioned about GSTM is knowledge based. So understanding risk is basically implying that enhance the knowledge, bridge the knowledge gaps, which makes the actions less optimal compared to if the knowledge was proper. So policies and practices should be based on an understanding of disaster risk in all the dimensions. And the dimensions of disaster risk are broadly, this is all from the UNISDR Sendai framework document. The disaster risk are vulnerability, capacity, exposure, and hazard characteristics. And use the knowledge for pre-disaster risk assessment so that we can be prepared for the next disaster. For prevention, if possible, certain kinds of disasters can be prevented from occurring. And for mitigation, if it is not possible to prevent, then we try to reduce the severity of the disaster as and when it happens. And the most important vehicle for disaster risk reduction has been recognized now as development plans and the city bylaws and the development control regulations, and then they also have to be implemented properly. So how can we go about doing these things? So even though the Sendai framework has articulated them in 2015, but it is on the basis of understanding of how it is done from around the world and with some successful case studies. So I'll just quickly show something about Mumbai. Before that, let me just give you the breakup. So hazard is, in the case of earthquake disaster risk, the ground shaking. Vulnerability is the effect on the built environment and the buildings and other infrastructure. And exposure is the consequence, which includes the direct and indirect loss, social losses as the number of people dead and injured, financial losses, coping capacity of the community and the economy, and the resilience to bounce back. And all of them combined are the risk to the disaster in that area. So as I mentioned, the hazard is the ground shaking, and there are multiple sources from which this hazard can be determined. Similarly, vulnerability can be determined from a number of sources. The exposure can also be determined similarly, and all of them can be combined to give us a risk. What I want to highlight also over there, the risk keeps on changing with time as the population increases, as the city becomes weaker, the risk increases, and as the infrastructure improves, the risk reduces. Globally, it has been found that if we do scenarios of the disaster events, projecting what is going to happen in a future disaster, then understanding of those scenarios provides us with the information to identify where are our hotspots, where are our most critical weaknesses, and what is going to be the impact of addressing the weaknesses. How much do we improve if we are able to address certain weaknesses? And for that, I will show you an example from Mumbai. So, for example, this is the city of Mumbai. And there are a number of earthquake faults which are in the vicinity of the city, not as many as what was there in Bhuj or what is there in northern India, but still, this is the area located as a moderate seismic zone. So very large earthquakes are not possible or not expected, but moderate earthquakes are expected. And the scenario I'm going to show is for an earthquake which occurs over here. It's about 20 kilometers from the city. So this is the strength of shaking. Now, obviously, the closer you are to the epicenter, greater is going to be the strength of shaking. But it is not just proportional to the distance, because shaking also depends on the local soil conditions, which may either amplify or de-amplify the shaking. So when that information is provided, for example, here, this is the area you can see the shaking is redder than in the areas to the north or to the south of it, because this is the area where there is amplification of ground shaking occurring to a very large extent. And this is the projection of what kind of casualties in terms of injuries will occur. And this is again, the darker the color means higher is the density of injuries. And you can see that even though the ground shaking was approximately proportional to the distance, injuries are not that way, because the type of buildings in terms of the weakness against earthquake are different in different parts of the city. And this can be this has been used over here to identify where a larger number of casualties will occur. And this is the number of deaths. So injuries occurring has a different profile than the deaths occurring, because not all injuries are going to result in deaths. And there are certain kinds of buildings where a larger proportion of people are not likely to survive than in some other kinds of building. And that information can also be collected and used for planning. And when we put all of these together, then for a projection of a magnitude 6.5 earthquake, what we are finding is that if we just look at the numbers, about 160,000 deaths would be the projected number over there. And with a similar number of injuries, which also includes many of these people who would require hospitalization. And the economic losses, again, in terms of the direct and indirect economic loss over there. And if we just try to understand these numbers again, so these are the numbers of what occurs within a few minutes of the earthquake. And if we compare to what was happening, for example, during COVID-19, at the peak rate, the number of new infections requiring hospitalization, which means the number of new hospital beds which was required, was less than 1,000, versus even a small fraction of this requiring hospitalization would be way more than the capacity of total beds available, not just in Mumbai, but perhaps maybe even the entire state of Maharashtra. And even the peak daily fatalities in Mumbai during COVID-19 was in hundreds versus within 5 to 10 minutes this. And already we know that during COVID-19 in every state, in every city of the country, the medical facilities were overwhelmed and the demand was way in excess of what was available. So if a tiny fraction of these was already seen over the last several months to exceed the capacity which is available, it just tells us about what kind of shortfall we have to make up for. If we accept that this is a level which we will not do anything to reduce. So obviously, what it means is that we need to work not on how to provide hundreds of new hospitals and so on, but on how we can reduce this, because through the scenario we know what causes these, and we can address them so that we reduce the underlying risk and we reduce the number of deaths, we reduce the number of injuries. And that is what Sendai framework is telling all countries to do, to understand the risk and then take action on it. So the impact of a damaging earthquake in any major Indian city will be similarly severe and far beyond the current management capacity of the city. So if I can quickly summarize what I have been saying, the past, for example, the Bhuj earthquake, and the present illustrate the challenges in managing urban disaster risk in countries like India. And understanding seismic risk, which is priority one on the Sendai framework, is the most crucial starting point. If we don't understand the risk well, then in that case, whatever efforts we take, whatever we do, may make a small difference, but it would be suboptimal utilization of resources and people's time. And seismic risk and its contributions are not well understood among decision makers, technical community, or the community at large. And that has to be the first one to be addressed. And seismic risk can be effectively reduced when the influence of the underlying factors are also understood. So with this, I would like to close the talk. And I again congratulate NIDM for organizing this very important thematic session. And I hope that NIDM will do a number of webinars on Bhuj earthquake and the lessons which have come out of that. Okay, thanks, Amir.
Thank you so much, sir, for nicely describing the current scenario at national level. So definitely, आपने डरा दिया है. Let's see how things settle down. It's a grim situation, no doubt about that. Especially the medical sector requires a lot of overhauling, and as you rightly mentioned, that scenario building need to be done. That is the need of the hour, and based on those scenarios, we have to appropriately plan our actions. So we have to pull up our socks, and definitely we have to go a long way in mitigating the urban risk, urban earthquake risk at national level. So thank you once again, sir. So now we are shifting to slightly solution oriented things. आपने जो डराया है, उत्पल शर्मा सर हमें उसका सॉल्यूशन प्रोवाइड करेंगे अर्बन एरियाज के लिए. So Professor Utpal Sharma is currently Dean and Director of Institute of Architecture and Planning at Nirma University. And before that, he doesn't require introduction basically. Just for the benefit of those who are not familiar with the Professor Sharma, he was with the SAPT University for almost the entire his professional inning was with the SAPT University, and he is one of the prominent experts in urban planning, disaster safe urban planning basically, and he is the pioneered so many initiatives post Bhuj earthquake. With this brief introduction, I request Professor Utpal Sharma to take over and let us listen to him for his solutions for the challenges posed by the urban earthquakes or urban disasters in our national scenario. Thank you, sir. This is your turn, Professor Utpal Sharma.
Thank you very much. I have Professor Ravi has already done the background for me, so it is easy for me to do presentation. Today he decided to become an urban planner, so it is good. Together for the Bhuj earthquake. And the first day we were sleeping on the tent, outside somewhere in the tent. It was very cold, and since then we have been friends. So it was nice that I'll show a few slides and maybe we can discuss them. Yeah.
Caiu essa? सर ये आपका स्क्रीन है. हाँ.
Can you see my screen?
जी सर देख रहे हैं.
Okay.
It's okay.
Next कहाँ तक? Next slide better नहीं.
हाँ, एक मिनट.
10 मिनट.
हाँ, कोई बात नहीं.
Okay, so this is the first slide, but I think all of you already know about it, but basically saying that 60% of India is earthquake prone, and entire Himalayan belt and Gujarat, and these are not based on any scientific study, but wherever we have an earthquake, we declare that as some kind of a zone, and that Gujarat was not there, but now it will become a zone 5, and entire northeastern belt. I'm basically from Guwahati, so I know the whole literature, how people take care of earthquake and the kind of construction that you have. Next. Now, basically, as Ravi has already mentioned, that in India, mostly the major part of the non-engineered building and the buildings are made out of rubble and stone, etc. And those are very highly vulnerable. And basically, if you have a timber construction or a steel structure or RCC building properly designed, they're relatively safer if it is taken care of. Next. Now, these are some of the glimpses that Ravi has already shown, but this is from Ahmedabad on the right hand side, the Mansi Tower, which is the one that become very famous. Next. And a lot of buildings, it is not because the buildings are not really properly designed, but when the building had hollow plinth, and they didn't have a kind of structurally well, bands and a kind of a plinth being written not there, a building just came down by one floor and it is all over. And that means that there's a whole lot of learning that has to be learned for the designing of building, architecturally and structurally. And because of which many of the buildings just totally collapsed. Next. Now this is from a building in Ahmedabad, which is Mansi Tower, and this is it was very typical in Ahmedabad. It was such a faulty building bylaw. When the buildings are there, and the municipal corporation and the authority they allow you to project balcony, 6 feet balcony all around. And people do the projection, then keep the balcony inside the house, and then you get some column in the middle of your room. And then when the building shakes, then the buildings fall down. And many times some of the columns are even removed from the building. And we needed an earthquake like this in Ahmedabad to do the correction in the building bylaws. You're doing not only rampant violation of building bylaws, that is basically for a richer area, high income and middle income area, where the tall buildings are very seriously damaged. And we needed an earthquake to really set up the building bylaws and for full compliance of it. Next. Consequently, like in Bhuj, it is a photograph of Ahmedabad old city, basically made out of timber construction and infill of sometimes wood or brick or whatever. Nothing happened to this area. So there is a kind of a traditional architecture. We have something to learn from it. Next. Now, coming back to the issues of urban planning, and most of the India is that we are growing so rapidly. And many a time the things happen before you can plan. This is from the periphery of the Ahmedabad called Bhopal area. And in this situation that is very difficult to plan for this area, and we actually accept whatever is developed as a haphazard development, we finally accept that this is our plan. And India, many a time, the plan follows the development. It should be the other way around. We should have a development plan beforehand, and the plan should happen, development should happen according to the plan. In our situation, sometimes the development takes place and the planning happens later on, and it creates all kinds of problems. And in this situation, taking care of any earthquake or disaster, taking care of disaster is virtually impossible. Next. Similarly, issues of urban villages, every urban area has villages, and all the land of the villages are taken away, and the core area of the village is left to die. And they're basically, very poor quality of construction, and they get very seriously damaged. And this is a typical problem for most of the Indian cities, that how to integrate those urban villages into the fabric of the city. This is from a town, Guwahati, but it is true for most of the Indian cities. What you find in most of the Indian cities, except for the master plan, which happens at a major road network at every 1 or 2 kilometers away, internal road network, open space and amenities never happens. Next. Because we always go for a land acquisition as a model, and authority is not in a position to acquire all the land for road, open space and amenities, and you find that every pocket of land has not adequate road, not adequate open space, not adequate space for education, recreational facilities, and even medical facilities. So all this is happening because of the faulty planning system, that everything is dependent on the land acquisition, and either the state government or the local municipal corporation is not in a position to acquire all the land and make it happen. So it needs some kind of understanding of the management of land, which Gujarat has done to some extent with the town planning scheme mechanism, and without his understanding of land. It is true for most of the Indian cities and towns. This is what I'm showing in this picture. It is true for almost every city. And with this kind of situation, there's no way that we can really talk about earthquake risk reduction or do any urban planning to take care of it. This is not only at the building level, it has to happen at the area level, at the city level. And with this kind of inadequation, each of the physical and social infrastructure will not be able to handle the issues of earthquake. Next slide. These are like slums from Mumbai, what Ravi was saying, Ravi. And with people like 50% of the population of the city live like this. And they were also highly affected during the COVID. And we need, next slide, we need major redevelopment of our slums and informal settlement to talk about low-rise, high-density building with affordable, good quality public infrastructure. And sellable built-up areas can be on the periphery, but we need to redevelop the slum areas to really make it safe for earthquake and as well as for other disasters, even including COVID, etc. All need to be basically talks about redevelopment, some of the core areas of the city, including the slums. Next. I right now doing some work for the city of Shimla, and we'll find that such haphazard development on the hill slopes and also in a highly dangerous seismic 5 zone. I don't know how people are actually making such construction and permissions have been given to build those. Okay, and it needs a very kind of planned effort, and you don't have to wait for a disaster to happen. I think we need to take care of it beforehand so that this kind of situation doesn't happen. Next slide. Next slide. Next. Now some attempts have been made, like this is an example for the city of Hyderabad, where all the layers of rivers, water bodies, soil quality, slope, including microgeneration if it is available, and one can superimpose and create a plan saying that all the dark brown areas where one can build a city and the green areas is to be protected. Next. But otherwise, a plan like this can be made. If you don't do this kind of, now that all the geoinformatics is all available, satellite images are available, one can superimpose all the different layers of information to build in areas where it is safe. As well as make a plan which really respond to the situation, which was not there 20 years before. I remember getting some satellite images and aerial photographs, but now it is available for all the Indian towns and cities, and we can make our plan in a much proper way, keeping all the information, all the layers all put together, and it will help us making a plan. Next. Now, this is one of the issues this is not only true for earthquake, but this is for all urban planning in India, that we have to have some way to land development mechanism, town planning scheme or a land pooling, guided urban development. Mumbai has some transfer of development, right? We need to have some of the mechanism by which you can get the area for public purposes, for roads, open space and amenities where we can lay the infrastructure. Next. Now, this is, for example, for the city of Hyderabad, the high-tech city of Hyderabad. It was developing in a haphazard way, and there is no public infrastructure. And suddenly we decide to, next slide, decide to make it into a high-tech city of Cyberabad. And it was possible that using some kind of a tool of FAR as on premium, and we could actually build a new city for 1 million people, and now it is working. So basically, it needs a whole issue of land management within the urban area to make it happen, and it can become safe for earthquake as well as for having all the social facilities and amenities. Next. Coming back to Bhuj, the Bhuj was very badly damaged, as many of our speakers have already said. Next. And what is saying that before, you can see the kind of a fine-grained road network with a lot of dead-end situations and not much of vehicle or possibilities. And a new plan really talked about kind of a better road network, which is motorable, and also fine-tuning the redevelopment in terms of road network is revamped, but with a limited possibility, but using the same land pooling system of a town planning scheme. But it is this kind of redevelopment is required for most of the historic areas for Indian towns and cities. And for that, I don't think you have to wait for an earthquake to happen. You should try to do it beforehand. Next. Like on left-hand side, what was the kind of a land pooling? Some plots had access, some plots didn't have, and later on a plan was made to at least everybody had a kind of a vehicular road in front of the house so that it is, in case of disaster, it can be made accessible. Next. What has been done? Now it is only the government opinion. Till now we have made some kind of vulnerability at least, some kind of a NDMA guideline. It is comprehensive in scope, but next. But basically what is that we only have a national level code and a minimal response from the various states. Various state governments are not doing much work. Though we have set up this, Gujarat, GSTM, etc. Many of the other states are not doing anything. No response from cities. Right now I have heard that Aizawl is doing some kind of disaster-based building regulation. But I think we need to work for most of the Indian towns and cities to talk about bylaws which should not take care of the disasters. Next. Now, issues to be focused on it. Other is that we also have to have good trained manpower. Is required. Even architect engineers have not much clue about earthquake and how the building design has to be taken care of. There's a specific code for hill areas, coastal areas. We have no idea. And also the vulnerability of various typology of building based on the site-specific condition. I think all this has to be, had to be focused. Next. Now, bottlenecks, why cannot implement all this? Because the 90% of houses are basically made out of natural material, and it is get contrast. I don't know, we are talking about civil engineering, architectural education, more on concrete and other things, but 90% houses are made out of natural material. These are all highly vulnerable. And in the curriculum, we hardly teach these subjects. That's why they are not. There is a total lack of trained manpower. Next. Way forward. Yes, I think Ravi is already right. It has to be engineering component technical education. In Sinha and other colleges, the engineering level, it is already happening. But we need to train the practicing architects and engineers, training of artisans, update all building bylaws at the municipal level. Ahmedabad did some amount because of the disaster, but we need to further refine it. And the whole techno-legal regime has to be worked out. Violations are plenty, and what is approved and not something else happens, and we have to really be very strong action to be taken. Retrofitting of existing lifeline structures, and including housing vulnerability maybe as an indicator in the census operation. We don't even know which buildings are vulnerable. Now, for the urban planning, major issue of the Indian cities are the peri-urban growth, which happened outside the municipal boundary or urban authority boundary, and there is no planning that is happening. And that's where the picture bowl habitat growth and all the dangerous situation that happens. We need to have appropriate land development tool like town planning scheme, TDR, and other building bylaws. Without that, all our planning has to be, it's only a pipe dream. We have to really make it happen. And the public building infrastructure should be adequate, and they have to be safe. So we have to take care of that. Next. Now, basically most of the Indian cities were building bylaws asking for FAR 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3, 4, whatever. But we have very little road and open places amenities. So without the land development tool, the building bylaws have no meaning. And slums, if you have to be redeveloped, but it will be more of low-rise, high-density with adequate ability. We should not talk about slum redevelopment, the money-making venture to be sold off to the builder lobby. We'll build housing for the rich, and some other land will be for the guys who will packed into one-room houses. At a plot level, no unauthorized construction has to be allowed, including balcony cover. That's what we are learning from Ahmedabad. Not only planning, but also regular management of the building is very, very important. And they also need to be buildings should be rated with some kind of a star rating, so that we know that the we are buying something, it is of poorer quality or good quality, and the price is related. Many a time we do not know about it. And I think the building, which is the house that's the biggest investment of one's life, we don't even know the quality of what we are buying. Unless we buy a car, we exactly know what is the specification. For a building, we do not know. I think we have to make it much more transparent. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir, for a nice and elaborated, very good presentation, highlighting the need and challenges of the current day. The only query coming to my mind is, do we have the example of land pooling in urban areas like we did in Bhuj?
Yeah, in Ahmedabad, yes. Ahmedabad, Maharashtra now have it.
Okay, so that is the way forward.
Land pooling is clear. Bhuj happened because it was happening in Ahmedabad. If Ahmedabad didn't have a land pooling, Ahmedabad would have 100,000 building would have fallen down.
Okay, so at least some raise there. So we will come back with some questions towards the end if time is permitting. Thank you so much, sir, for nice and providing those solutions for urban challenges which we are facing in light of that the Bhuj earthquake. So now we move ahead and request Professor Chandan Ghosh, who is the professor at National Institute of Disaster Management, to put some lessons learned from whatever we did after Bhuj earthquake. So Professor Ghosh, are you there? Professor Chandan Ghosh?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh. Okay, this is your turn and try to be brief.
Okay.
Lessons learned from and afterwards from Bhuj earthquake. Last 20 years, lessons learned.
Okay, may I show a few slides only?
It's up to you. It's up to you, but try to be short, brief.
Okay. So it is a really wonderful occasion to share this platform along with eyewitness view, especially, Professor Ravi Sinha and our Executive Director, Major General Bindal, and then IPS Vivek Srivastavi, and of course our Professor V.K. Sharma, everyone, and especially the experience that they have shared. I hope that it is of tremendous value. So in this way that I want to just flag 1-2 points only. Remembering Bhuj earthquake after 20 years, what are the lessons of today? And just before me, when Professor Utpal Sharma also showed that what is growing up, that whether the lessons is well learned or it is going in a direction. It is the audience and the people that who are attending this and the way that this is being done, then we have to take it in our life. So I want to show that earthquake is not the new one, that when we are going to the history, you see 1819, 1845, 1903, and especially 1956 when Anjar earthquake, and very near to this that Bhuj earthquake has happened. And then March 1970. So all these historical records are also there. There are millions of documents are also available. Code has been developed. Several changes has been made. National Building Code, and there are 8 to 10 such earthquake-resistant construction buildings also have been done. And many new things are under development. Not only that, like using the seismic microzonation report, that which more than 12 cities under Ministry of Earth Sciences that have been generated, where Delhi is one of that in 2015. Based on that and based on 12, 13 more other cities, now a new code is under development. It is in the draft stage under Bureau of Indian Standards. So that the land development issue and then plan that follows development, whereas development should follow the plan, as nicely coined by Professor Utpal Sharma. That will come up only when, even in the broader zone of seismic zone, we can go for microzonation, where 30 cities microzonation project is underway, where it is going on. So we will be able to have more such things when taking into account of all these earthquakes that which have been happening even in the Bhuj and surrounding region. and the kind of microgenation that was done in 2001 by Japan, Japanese help, and then also various other microgenation work done by Indian scientists, especially after Jabalpur earthquake in 1997. But combining all these things in a codal form and then bringing out comprehensive guidelines and documents for the planners, architects, engineers, local people together has been the aim of the current lesson that we have to make forward. So, but I just want to cut it short that what is the lesson taken by other countries, even though we have mentioned, Professor Ravi Sinha also has visited there and mentioned about the Bonga or even Assam type house or Dhaji Diwari type of house, or in Uttarakhand, that Koti Banal architecture that for thousands of years that they have survived, even though some documents are available, but they have not come out to our document that especially in the Bureau of Indian Standard Code or things. So here I would like to mention that even in 1960s or 70s, how Japan has started, you can see in the YouTube that how this pagoda type of structure where red mast is there and how this lesson have been taken. So in this, even documents are there and how these lessons have been taken forward and then brought into laboratory to see that how that the mast has worked there and bringing it to the laboratory, testing it, and bringing it to making the following the same principle into such multi-story building is the lesson that in more than 3-4 decades back is being implemented in some of the buildings, which we have not yet taken in our country, even though Bunga or Assam type house or Dhajitiwari houses, they are still remaining in 1 story or at the most 2 story, but unknowing or we do not know what will be their performance or behavior. So lesson is that we have to take those things, just mentioning is not well, only documents in world encyclopedia is available. Only document is available, but we engineers and all the research organization, we have to see that why they have not broken and bring it to the laboratory, test it, experiment it, and implement it into the prototype building that we have to take it. Even though many new technologies have come out in the name of base isolation or dampers and tube mass dampers, and many technology has come up, and even our institutes in the country also have taken lead, especially IIT Bombay or even IIT Guwahati, IIT Roorkee. But bringing it to such kind of application in a mass scale needs a political will. This is one thing that I wanted to highlight. And second thing, just important thing is that, of course, the kind of publications that going on, you see 1960, the first publication they have made, because Japan is known for earthquake. So earthquake resistance of traditional Japanese wooden structure, they have studied in 1960, and continuously this is under publications and research have been done. And if you know that there are typical structure, especially wooden structure, of course these days natural woods are not being used. And even in our offices or many furnitures also, we are making manufactured or artificial wood. So they have made a typical 4 to 5 story building, 4-story building, which are made of wood. And those are really, if we say that earthquake resistant and earthquake proof and resilient enough, but we have not yet started. At least 4-story building, even in slum area or wherever area, even wooden houses, they are so nicely made in those days itself, which they are following based on such kind of lesson that they have taken. So we are yet to start with masterminding this technology of Dhaji Diwari, bringing it to 1-story, 2-story, 3-story, 4-story, and bringing wood and many other kind of materials that which are available. These days, 3D printers and many such effort that we are taking up in line with developments that are taking place in many other countries. Even though we know that these are the lessons and these are all real pictures that has happened, but these we know even 2-3 decades have been experimented also. These have been made experimented also, that how dangerous these buildings are. these have been experimented here, 6-story building, and how quickly they are broken here at the ground floor, but still we are making this kind of building. So again, in another case, the lesson just we have taken, it is just a celebration, or yes, we know we are living in zone 4 or zone 5. That is not the only satisfaction just for keeping in mind. But our research program, as well as experimentation, validation, checking, which are made elsewhere more than 2 decades back, experimenting and proving that how it is failing. Even then, we are going on making such kind of building construction. And only thing that which are not being followed is putting this red kind of stirrup even in majority of the building construction. So even though whatever lessons that we are trying to say that in the last 2 decades in the name of Bhuj earthquake, but we have not implemented even this minimum one, where we have to take it very strongly. And so that is why that the kind of buildings that we are making, giving permission, and the kind of Bhuj that has given this lesson, and the kind of construction that which are being done elsewhere, like this is in Guwahati, this is also in Guwahati, using this kind of cross bracing where functionality is not disturbed. So lesson is there. We have experimented, we have shown it, but it is the will of the community as well as municipality have to take it with the right motivation and spirit. And not only that, whatever building that has been made like this, we can go for this kind of building retrofitted to notionally, at least by making red colored here wall, which can make this building also without disturbing the functionality. So if we are to take especially urban risk mitigation and the kind of buildings that we are still giving permission, we say that you give permission, but at least take these minimum measures that which can establish reliability of earthquake resilience of even steel floor. So this is what just I wanted to highlight in brief. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Ghosh, for nicely highlighting the lessons learned. And it's a continuous process which we have to keep learning, and we have to take our way forward from here onwards. So, you rightly mentioned, there are a lot of learnings post Bhuj earthquake, as the other speakers, especially Professor Utpal Sharma, Professor Ravi Sinha has highlighted about the construction industry, and the need of the hour is that we have to invest a lot of efforts in making our built environment safe from earthquakes, not only from earthquakes, from other hazards as well. So we have to go multi-hazard approach, and we have to go for holistic approach where we have to inculcate the culture of safety for everyone, whosoever is the stakeholder. So thank you so much, Professor Ghosh, for highlighting all these. And this is the need that we have to not only learn lessons, but we have to act upon all those learnings well in time. Now we are definitely running out of time, and this is the time to conclude. And for concluding remarks and summing up the session, we have requested Professor Santosh Kumar, who is the faculty at National Institute of Disaster Management, who has been the director of SARC's Center for Disaster Management when it was part of NIDM. He had served in very varied capacity. He was director in charge of National Institute of Disaster Management as well. He served in the World Bank as well. So it's sir. बस हो गया. So Professor Santosh Kumar is one of the eminent persons amongst us. So sir, this is your turn to your concluding remark as well as closing the session, and then we will come for vote of thanks, formal vote of thanks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Amir. This is very kind of an interesting deliberations went on after 20 years on the Bhuj earthquake or the Kutch earthquake, or there are many names have been given to this, Sasakawa Merit Award earthquake, or you can say that this is a golden award for good governance and innovation of, and Bank Green. So many awards got confirmed. So this reflects that this has been a very good experience of long-term recovery and reconstruction as a Gujarat earthquake. But taking this, all the senior panelists, which we have, Professor V.K. Sharma, Sharma, Ravi Sinha, Mr. Srivastav, then we have Professor Chandan Ghosh, Major General Manoj Kumar Bindal, Professor V.K. Sharma, all are Chandan Ghosh also there. Everybody highlighted their own experience and this. So my experience is not in structure as a whole, I would say, but mine because that time I was working with the World Bank and my engagement with the long-term recovery. So I will not say much on this, that these three awards have been saying that already considered. The idea which I would like to highlight in terms of here as a conclusion, as a concluding remark, that many new things which emerged during this earthquake. At that time, I was working with three major recovery programs of the World Bank. One was 1999 Super Cyclone Orissa, and then 2001 Gujarat earthquake, and then another was this Andhra Pradesh Cyclone Recovery Project. So these three, and we were looking into the kind of intervention and innovations and the initiatives taken. So first of all, I would like to compliment Honorable Prime Minister here, who was the then Chief Minister, the kind of things Professor Arya was there during that time in this earthquake recovery. Dr. P.K. Mishra was there. And other than those people, I would like to take those names because we are remembering after 20 years. Mr. C.K. Koshi was there as the Principal Secretary of Relief. Mr. Sahu was there. Rajiv Topno was there. Mr. Thiru Puga. So other than Mr. Vivek Srivastav and Mr. Rajesh Kishore, and of course, Mr. Rastogi was there as a seismologist. So one thing which I would like to, many new institutional arrangements came out from this earthquake. And then this is the biggest learning. The disaster risk management and could not be done unless we have a set of new institutional arrangements. Ad hoc will not work. So that we remember Gujarat earthquake very well. So NDMA, SDMA, DDMA was the creation after that. Second important thing which I would like to highlight, where every speaker is highlighting, as a build back better, where there's large number of masons got trained, and then large number of engineers got recruited. The building design got changed. The heritage buildings were restored, and also heritage city themselves. That Ahmedabad example came. That was a new kind of a beginning. New chapter got added in Gujarat earthquake. The third thing which I would like to mention in terms of the women empowerment, the first time in the history of recovery of earthquake or any recovery planning, the joint ownership name given in each of the households which were created. That led to the collateral right to women when this name were given. So that was another thing which I would like to highlight. Hospital itself was a new incarnation of Bhuj earthquake because the base isolation technology came in India as a kind of a first of its experience. So what I'm trying to make is that many new innovative things were happened in this Gujarat earthquake. But where we lacked, how this information could not percolated down to many states, which if you see that Amir Ali Khan's background, and you can see the seismology map, which is being a vulnerability map of earthquake, the whole of the Himalayan states and the northeastern states painted very dark color, which Mr. Professor Utpal Sharma also shown, and also which warning was given by Professor Ravi Sinha. So that is very interesting, that knowing the risk, which he highlighted, the Sendai framework, understanding risk, the first time also tried in Gujarat when all the mappings were done, areas were identified. But the challenge which remained, which I still flag in terms of that how we are moving, those initiatives taken in Gujarat is still to be taken by many states in the country and also in the South Asia and the Asian region. One that I would like to highlight, that setting up that kind of a state-of-art institution, strengthening of SDMA and the DDMA. As Mr. This Vivek Srivastav has highlighted, and Major General Bindal also highlighted about the first 100 minutes were very, very important for disaster response. So how this 100 minutes response preparedness and institutional arrangements and capacity development is taken in the not only one earthquake prone areas, but also in many high prone zone 5 and zone 4 disaster prone in these states, whether it's a cyclone or whether it's a flood prone area. And the insurance was another instrument which got birth in this Gujarat earthquake in India. Because I remember after 3 years of a recovery program, Gujarat government organized an international experience sharing workshop in which the Kutch earthquake was discussed, Taiwan earthquake was discussed, Turkey earthquake was discussed, Japan earthquake was, China earthquake was discussed. And we found that more than 13 lakhs of the houses to be reconstructed in very short span of time. So the community-led initiative actually set the tone in India. So that became the global kind of a. And another thing, the point from my side on this remark, that the first state which brought the benefit monitoring after the earthquake or recovery program, they did the benefit monitoring study. And how this benefit has reached whether the recovery has actually helped the people or the state and the economy. And we found that, yes, it was a positive result which came. So these are the things that how the instruments and institutions are actually getting strengthened. And Gujarat, which lost 6 billion of US dollar at the time of that 2001, you can very well imagine the current, that was the 5% of today's GDP kind of a cost of the India. So there what this Gujarat looked into that financial recovery, bringing insurance, risk transfer mechanism, and also brought many social issues, inclusiveness. Then urban planning was a kind of a milestone of all these 4 districts. The replanning of the districts. I personally had visited almost most of the affected areas. So with this, I would not like much to speak on, but to conclude in terms of before taking from my side, before taking the final words from all the speakers, as Amir has entrusted me this task to take the way forward from all the speakers, I would suggest that the speakers should, whether they have the experience of response, they can highlight the response for the way forward, as they have already highlighted. But second, immediate recovery, where a lot of initiative took for the intermediate shelter arrangement and all. And the third is the final recovery. So maybe I can start from Professor V.K. Sharma. Are you there? Your last punchline, what you would like to say to NIDM, where NIDM can focus and many states this information can be disseminated. As a last punchline for Gujarat, you have spoke at length, but still any last punchline which you wish to say?
I think Professor Sharma is not there.
Then we can have General Bindal, or we will request him at the end. I would request at the end so that he can give this remark also. Professor Ravi Sinha, are you there?
Yeah, so actually, before the last so-called punchline, I would again like to reiterate what NIDM is doing, looking back in the last 20 years. This also should be institutionalized, more in-depth and a wider coverage of the lessons from Bhuj earthquake under the auspices of NIDM, as well as focusing on the critical aspects of the lessons learned from other disasters. As far as Bhuj earthquake is concerned, it is very critical because of the fact that it was an urban earthquake, urban disaster. And while we have to look at India as a whole, the impact of disasters in urban areas takes things to a different level altogether. So I think this should be a starting point to continue to have more focus on urban disasters.
Thank you, Professor Ravi Sinha. Beautiful point you have made. Now, can I request Mr. Vivek Srivastava for his punchline? Vivek ji, are you there?
Vivek sir, this is your turn to say a few words.
Few words just as a final concluding point from your side. We will come back to him. Probably he's on some line.
Yeah, Utpal Sharma.
Yeah, Sharma, Professor Utpal Sharma, from your side.
My punchline is that you should not wait for a disaster to happen and then you do the rectification. You should plan beforehand. In fact, even the COVID is now already showing a big light on urban planning. And most of the time, we only react when things happen, but we should be proactive and should be able to do proper planning. Indian urban planning is in shambles, and it is not good for earthquake, not good for COVID, not good for quality of life. It needs a major shake-up.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for highlighting this. Kannan Ghosh.
Yeah, as we have been into the thick and thin of earthquake risk mitigation training program, capacity building, along with the engineers, architects, town planners, in all these years, in fact, started from NCDM days to current days also. The only effort is that we have to make that we have to go now beyond this training and capacity building and go to the actual construction site where it is going on with the cooperation of the not only government but also the community, that where we can show them that even with earthquake resistant construction, whatever is available in the code or all over the world, the main punch point is that if they go for earthquake resistant constructions as per principle given that we know, experts that we know of, we can not only save at least 15 to 20% of the cost, but also ensure earthquake safety, the earthquake. So that kind of capacity building as well as field studies and giving with the community, working with the community should be the now way out beyond capacity building program, which we are doing in the classroom.
Thank you, Dr. Ghosh. Can we go back to Mr. Vivek Srivastava? Vivek ji, I need your last punchline from your side. Vivek ji. Vivek ji, can you give your last punchline as a way forward?
Sir, you have to unmute yourself.
That, but now after, I'll attempt to do that. One thing is, it actually had to be an earthquake like that of the Bhuj to awaken, especially so as to say, and maybe Southeast Asia, as one of the participants were pointing out, to look at this more closely and invest in this area, both in terms of preparation as well as in terms of retrofitting and making our buildings resilient to a disaster, different kinds of disaster. Now, once it has been done, now the way forward is only to take it forward, because the consequences, as has been pointed out by a number of participants, of disregarding this are too serious to actually bear. So there is no way but to pay heed. If disasters are around the corner, it may strike at any given point without too much way. We have to be prepared, both in terms of manpower, as what is to be done during a disaster and what preparations and is to be taken, and to make certain structures, especially disaster-proof. So during a disaster, at least you have some structures which you can fall back upon.
Thank you very much. I saw your the excerpts written in Dr. P.K. Misra's book also, Kutch Earthquake, and where you have contributed in that and you have highlighted this important point of response preparedness. And thank you reiterating this point here again, that some infrastructure should be there which can help in responding to disaster. And now I thank you very much, Vivek ji, for this. And now we move to General Bindal for giving his insights as a last punch, and also he can give as a kind of a remarks when we are taking as way forward at this point of time. General Bindal, please.
Thank you, Professor Santosh. Today's webinar has been very, very good, because there's a large number of sub-thematic issues. And I think there is a need to conduct webinars, more webinars on Bhuj earthquake and lessons learned, and breaking it down to sub-thematic levels so that we can do justice to each one of them. Well, there's so much to learn from that particular earthquake, which was the first major urban earthquake in India, where the lessons learned are tremendous, and they need to be followed, because we have nearly 67%, 57%, as was shown by in one of the slides, is earthquake-prone zone in the country. And now, with more than 60% urbanization, and in those 60% urban cities, more than 70-75% of the population lives. So the people who will likely to get affected, if such an earthquake strikes any urban area, built-up area, uh, the consequences are very, very high, because we also saw the statistics which were shown by Professor Ravi Sinha of the number of deaths which happens in the first 5 minutes uh, vis-a-vis COVID-19, where our complete medical system failed. Uh, so there is a need to create scenarios. There is a need to study the whole thing in a very, very holistic manner. It is not possible to prepare for an earthquake fully because of the magnitude involved. But what we can do is try and save as many lives as possible, first priority, and then try and save as many critical assets as possible, and then try and save rest all infrastructure possible. So for trying and saving loss of lives, it is very important that large number of capacity awareness programs are done, capacity building programs are done, mock drills are done, do's and don'ts are done, and uh, education for everyone is done as to what do they how do they construct their own buildings. So here the governance issue comes in, that even though building bylaws are there for earthquake proof construction, but somewhere it is not being followed in letter and spirit, and hence the governance issues related to earthquake proof construction has to be made implementable and has to be strictly followed. That is, I think, the basic of the whole issue. We have bylaws since long, even though they may not be sector specific or geographical specific, but still there are, even if certain percentage of that is followed, large number of the buildings which are now being constructed will be resilient to earthquake. So with this, I will thank each and every panelist and all the participants who listened to the discussions today. And I congratulate Dr. Amir Ali for hosting such good, informative webinar. Thank you, and over to you, Dr. Amir Ali Khan.
Santoshji, you'd like to conclude something by saying a few words? Your punchline.
No, just my punchline would be making invisible visible is my punchline, because most of the time when disaster happens, response becomes very popular, but a whole of the exercise done after that doesn't get noticed. In many of the times you have to document and everything, and invisibility will make you visible. With the moment you make visible in the planning, what Professor Sharma was telling, and probably that is the word which we will say that yes, success. And maybe the way could be the scenario based, and then we can achieve that. So making invisible visual is the biggest task for us to take for future.
So thank you, Professor Santoshji, for nicely concluding. And let's try together to make invisible visible, because that is the challenge which we have to bring out, and through which we can bring out a lot of changes which are required, which we are discussing for last 2.5 hours. So thank you. I take this opportunity to thank each and every one of the panelists, starting with Professor V.K. Sharma Sahab, who has kindly agreed to join us, Shri Vivek Srivastavji, who is definitely quite busy of late, and he's keeping all these engagements at slight away for the time being. And thank you so much, Vivek sir, Professor Sharma Sahab, and Professor Ravi Sinha and Professor Utpal Sharma. You are the guiding force. You have given wonderful insights in earthquake risk preparedness in the context of urban areas in India, in light of that Bhuj experiences. And a lot of things have already changed. And thank you so much for sparing your time and encouraging us at NIDM for taking up all those challenges. To stalwarts of NIDM, Professor Santosh Kumar and Professor Chandan Ghosh, you are the guiding force for making such a webinars. Last but not the least, ED sir, thank you so much for guiding the NIDM team and encouraging us to take up these challenges. And thank you for everything, sir. You are the guiding force for making NIDM so vibrant of late. And thank you for everything. And we assure you that we are taking all these things forward in a very proactive manner. And we will definitely plan something more interesting on related to Bhuj earthquake as well, under the guidance of you and the other colleagues at NIDM. Thank you everyone. Last but not the least, thank you to Yogita, who is working off screen, and the entire team of NIDM, including JD and trading cell and other colleagues of NIDM who has been contributing in making this webinar a success. So thank you all. Thank you all the participants for sparing your valuable time. Thank you all for sparing time, and it's a wonderful activity, and wait for another vibrant webinar in coming weeks. Thank you everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Amir.
Thank you, Amir.
Thank you.
Yes.
So with this, we just conclude, and Yogita, you may call it off. Thank you.